Thousands of children and families in Marion County struggle with issues like poverty, substance abuse, or mental and emotional illness. Many local services exist to help families in crisis, but families often don't know about these services or can't get to them. Unmet needs can result in child abuse, neglect, or juvenile delinquency. The Early Intervention Planning Council, through the Marion County Commission on Youth's Early Intervention and Prevention Initiative, has created a plan to give families earlier access to services in the hopes of reducing the number of children who get abused or neglected or turn to delinquent acts. We hope you enjoy our monthly program, Our Kids, Our Families, Our Communities, and learn more about the local services here to help you.
Hello and welcome to another segment of Our Kids, Our Families, Our Communities. Thank you for tuning in. I'm Shana Martin, Director of the Early Intervention and Prevention Initiative at McCoy. And today's topic is human trafficking, which admittedly enough is a topic I don't know much about, but when I learned about it from meeting Tracy McDaniel a couple months ago when she came to present, I thought this was something that we really needed to talk about and raise awareness in the community about human trafficking, because it is something that impacts all of us. It's something that impacts our community. Despite what we may think, kind of what I thought was this is something that happens in other countries, to other people, certainly not in our country and definitely not in our backyard in Indianapolis. And after listening to you, I've learned a lot and have had a lot of the things that you shared have stuck with me, and I've started to take note of that and look at young people from a different perspective and to try to better understand what they may be experiencing. And so thank you, Tracy, for being here today, and I'm just looking forward to learning more and having you share a lot of information about human trafficking. So why don't you start by just introducing yourself and telling us a little bit about who you work for and what you do.
Okay, well, thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here. My name is Tracy McDaniel, and I am the care coordinator for human trafficking for the Julian Center. Okay. With that being said, what I do is not only do I provide victim services, but I also provide outreach services to the community. So I'm part of IPATH, which is Indiana Protection Against Human Trafficked Humans, which I should know that off the top of my head. We're an IPATH task force, and we're made up of Homeland Security, the FBI, the Attorney General's office, the U.S. Attorney's office, and we have DCS, and we have a lot of other people at the table, and we collaborate on how we are going to put a dent in human trafficking in our area. We also work with certain cases of how we're going to provide victim services, and then also team them up with the prosecutor here, which is Mary Hutchinson, who tries a lot of our cases.
Okay, wow. So what is human trafficking?
So human trafficking, since we're talking about youth today, I'm going to focus on the human trafficking for youth. Okay. So human trafficking is we have to prove three elements, and it's force, fraud, and coercion. So human trafficking is any time that you traffic another human being. And a lot of times I think people think that means that that's across state lines, and that's not. So anytime someone's forced, coerced, and there's fraud involved is human trafficking. So since we're talking about youth, if I was to sell you my child for an apple for sex, that is human trafficking. It's that cut and dry. And I really want people to understand that, because since we're talking about youth, a lot of times individuals think that, in the system at hand, let me go back, like the most vulnerable population is runaway and foster care children. Okay. So once you're getting into that system, there's a lot of sexual abuse, there's a lot of sexual molestation, and I think sometimes in the eyes of the community, if a child has been let's say sold for rent or money, that's maybe sexual abuse or sexual molestation, and that's not the case. It's human trafficking. We passed a law in July that states that anyone under the age of 18, we do not have to prove force, fraud, or coercion. So any kind of trade for sex is human trafficking when it comes to a youth or a minor.
Okay, wow. And how often is that happening?
It occurs right here in Indiana. We are doing our best to make a dent, but like I said before, when you have foster care and runaways, and to be honest, I don't even think we've even hit the mark on, DCS just joined us, and that's Department of Child Services, just joined our task force. It's been about 7 months ago, really trying to identify these young girls and these young men who could be victims of trafficking. So it is prevalent. It's happening here in Indianapolis. I work with these young girls, and to be honest, we're really just trying to identify more girls here right now.
So how do you identify a victim? As you know, as just kind of a general community person, how would I know or start to identify, or what are the warning signs that a young person may be the victim of being trafficked?
A lot of times, you're gonna, especially like for a service provider or even just a community member out on the street, a lot of times they won't make eye contact. They're going to be with an older boyfriend. They will have a tattoo on their neck. A lot of times the tattoo will say daddy. Just yesterday I heard that there's a new trend where this is harder to identify, but in the summertime, if a girl's wearing shorts, that they actually have a money sign on their thigh. And hospitals are noticing that they're like, why would they have a money sign on their thigh? And it's because, technically they're for sale, and that's what the pimp wants. If they have a low-cut shirt on, sometimes they have cigarette burns across their breasts. And it's the girl who maybe is acting out. The girl who is she maybe does have a substance abuse issue. Maybe she has a mental health issue. I know one of the things that I found fascinating, we talked about this when I came to McCoy and did the thing, I hadn't heard the word fast. When you have a girl in school who you may think she's having sex with multiple men and she doesn't really care, that's a big red flag that something's going on. She could have been molested as a child. There could have been sexual abuse. I mean, anytime a child runs away and they're out on the street, it takes 48 hours for a pimp to get a hold of them. And that is happening here. If we think about the numbers of runaways and foster care youth, it's huge, and it needs to be addressed. And there are so many signs. Maybe the child's not eating, anorexia. There's that trauma bonding. A lot of times I get asked the question a lot, well, why don't they leave? Well, because, here's this man that came up to them, and it's that older boyfriend mentality that tells them that they love them, they're going to take care of them, they're going to buy them all the stuff. And in the beginning, the relationships seems great. Like, he loves me, no one else has loved me in my past, he's taking care of me. And then it takes that one moment where that pimp asks her to have sex with someone for money, and then they become a trafficking victim. And then that's the coercion. I mean, and a lot of times too, like these guys, they think, well, oh, they're not smart. They are. They're very manipulative. They're very charismatic. They know exactly what to say to these girls.
So what's the difference between trafficking and prostitution?
Well, in the youth sense, I mean, trafficking is where you're being forced to perform sexual acts for money by the trafficker. And prostitution is, your willingness. My stance on this is that no young girl grows up and decides that they want to be a prostitute, and we're talking about youth, so I'm focusing on that. And even if, let's just say for survival purposes, you have a young girl who runs away, she's out on the street, she's trying to survive, and she has sex for money. It just takes a matter of time for a pimp to get a hold of her anyway, or a trafficker. And these are young girls. I mean, this is happening in Indiana. They're happening at truck stops. They're happening at our schools. They're happening in malls. It's all around us. And I want to touch on, too, there's not, while a more vulnerable population is going to be someone in an urban area, that does not mean that socioeconomic status plays a role. They can be trafficked in Carmel, just that they can be trafficked here. I mean, you think of young girls, they're, especially like in that middle school age, where they're awkward, they, maybe they don't have a great relationship with their parents. They're looking for that. They're looking for love. It takes just seconds for someone to gain their trust. Facebook is huge, where, men are going on and pretending to be these cute little girls and friending these girls, and then that relationship. And I spoke to a survivor the other day, and she was telling me one of the biggest resources is men get into these chat rooms. And it just takes that one time for a girl to send a selfie in a cute tank top, thinking that she's close, she's in a tank top, and then that romantic relationship starts to form. And then it just takes seconds for, that relationship or them to be taken. So,
what's the age range? I mean, what's the youngest victim you've seen?
The average age range is between, it starts around 12, but I actually just spoke with someone the other day, and it was 7. So statistically, I can just kind of touch just for an example for the U.S. Department, so 27 million men, women, and children are victims of human trafficking in the United States. That's not talking about internationally, that's just here in the United States. So statistically, 12 to 14 years is the average age. Most of the girls that I work with personally are between the ages of, the youngest has been 17 to 25. But that's said because, you know, when you're trafficked as a child, you're more than likely to be with the Department of Child Services. So we're working on that too, of how to provide safe haven. Because right now we don't have a safe haven for these children to go. We have some residential facilities, but they're not geared for children who have been trafficked.
Okay.
A couple other things that, one of the big things I want to talk about is this is a $32 billion industry. You know, $32 billion industries.
Wow.
And when we're talking to our youth, and I especially want to talk to parents about letting your children, you know, monitoring their Facebook pages, protecting them. And then Grand Theft Auto is huge. You know, I know so many parents who let their child play Grand Theft Auto, but in this game you can steal, you can kill, and basically you can leave a prostitute bludgeoned on the ground. And what is that message? You know, some parents have fought back to me and said, well, you know, they're just desensitized to that. They, you know, they know the difference. Well, some kids don't. And what message does that say about women? You know, when, if you can just be, you know, killed on a video game, what's to say you can't be killed on the street? And it is happening, where we have, you know, young girls that are targeted.
Okay. So how does, if there is a victim of trafficking, you know, watching this right now, where does she or he go? Because I assume that this, you've talked a lot about females, but I assume that males, young boys, are victims as well.
They can be. I have actually never worked with any men or young boys, and I haven't seen any young boys here in Indiana. But I'm not, that's not to say that it doesn't exist. I think one of the bigger problems, Shana, is we don't think about is girls don't identify as trafficking. You know, this is, human trafficking is kind of that buzzword right now. You know, they don't, they identify as being abused, or either in the physical or emotional sense, or the sexual molestation. They don't really identify as being trafficked. So I think raising awareness on that is something that we do with our youth curriculum, which I'll touch on a little bit later. But education is so important. I mean, that's why you're here. I mean, we are really trying to educate these young girls and boys when we go out into the schools. We're talking to them about pornography. We're talking to them about body image. You know, we're talking, you know, we went to 5 schools to do our curriculum, and 3 individuals were identified.
Wow.
That's huge.
It is. And did they self-identify, or did the teachers identify them?
It was after the presentation that they had came out and they either saw out a social worker or a teacher.
Okay.
You know, and that's huge, and it's scary. It's scary to know that there's a lot of youth out there that, you know, maybe their brother is selling them, or maybe their uncle's selling them, but they don't identify with that, and it causes so much trauma. You know, so many levels of trauma.
And so how does a victim get out? I mean, how do they get help? How do they stop being trafficked? How do they get support for all of the trauma? Because I can imagine that's an ongoing, lifelong battle.
It is a lifelong. It's not something that can be done in 6 months or a year. It really is a lifelong battle. I think first off, find a person to trust. And I always make this precedent to teachers. Not too long ago, and I tell this story because it's a true story. There was a teacher who, a young girl came to her and told her that she was being touched inappropriately, and the teacher looked at her and said, "I need you to stop. I'm going to take you to the social worker." And that completely changed that relationship between that teacher, because she shut her down and then she didn't feel open. So really, when you're talking about teachers, service, any youth providers, you know, talk to your girls about this. Talk to them about body image. Talk to them about, if you see an older boyfriend hanging around, talk to them. Have a candid conversation with them. And then teachers, you know, I know that teachers don't want to report. You know, I get it. As a social worker, you get it. As a social worker, it's hard. You know, I think you don't know what you're. You know, you don't know. Well, okay, this could be this, or maybe it's not this. But it's better to know than not know. And especially, talk about, you know, foreign-born victims. If you have kids who speak another language and they're sleeping all day in your class, they're not eating, that's a red flag.
Okay.
You know, and you know, talking to your superiors, making a phone call to DCS and say, hey, this just looks, I don't know, this is the scenario I have, what do you think about this? But really, the first responders, service providers, letting them know that in the beginning of that classroom, I'm a safe person that you can talk to. You can come and tell me anything, because that's who they're going to tell.
Yeah.
They're not going to tell their parent. A lot of times, we both know this, just, sometimes if you tell your parent that you've been sexually molested, they're not going to believe you. And that's to say the same with parents. If a child comes to you, believe them. There's a reason they're saying something like that. Something is going on where they're disclosing that information. But making sure, again, like youth providers and just being aware and letting kids know that you're a safe place. And then contacting me. They can contact me at the Julian Center. We have an 800 line that we can post.
Okay.
And, like I said, call Department of Child Services. Make that phone call. They have a protocol now where if someone thinks someone's been trafficked, they contact IPATH immediately and law enforcement. So we are really working on a protocol to change the way kids are identified.
Okay, great. So Julian Center, Department of Child Services, Exodus Refugee Services also is a part of IPATH?
Yeah, you can contact Exodus.
Okay.
They work more with foreign-born, but they will get the contact information to me for sure.
Okay, and so youth serving organizations, teachers, schools can contact you to get the training
Yes.
To better understand human trafficking and how to detect it. And is the curriculum geared towards training adults and youth, or okay?
Yeah, so IPATH has been working with Department of Education
Okay.
to get this curriculum in, which will be posted. And the curriculum is fantastic. It's called CASE, and it is Chicago against sexual exploitation. So we go in, and everyone who goes in is trained, and we talk to, like I said, the youth about social media, Grand Theft Auto, prostitution, a lot of the things that it is a little bit uncomfortable, but a lot of things that they need to learn about sexting, Facebook. Backpage is a huge website that has multiple girls on there, and that's where a lot of the girls are found, is on this page. It's kind of like how Craigslist is, but that part got shut down. But it's all over the world, and that's where a lot of our girls are identified here in Indiana. It's called Backpage.
Backpage.
Backpage. Talking to them about that, talking to them about pictures that we see in the media, and really kind of talking about that self-esteem, because so much of the self-esteem and that the abandonment issues and a lot of things that these young girls and boys are going with is relevant across the board to all of them, and really kind of addressing those and how to make positive choices where, if someone is trying to talk to you, you tell a safe person. And if that safe person isn't a parent, whether it be a teacher or a service provider, a lot of the aftercare school camps that are going on.
Yeah. So if a young person has run away and then they are picked up by a pimp or trafficked, where do they typically live? Do they live with the pimp? Do they live in shelters? Are they just homeless? Where are they?
Well, I mean, technically they'd probably be homeless, but they live with the pimps.
Okay.
The pimps, put them up in like motels.
Okay.
Motels across, Indiana. I mean, they could be out on the street.
Okay.
They could be living in a house. They could have, girls, traffickers are just not men. Girls can be traffickers. They have like what they call the bottom, which is an individual who, let's say they have a trafficker, but they'll go out and recruit girls and say, hey, if you come with me, you can make a lot of money. And then they're controlling the situation either by themselves or with the trafficker.
Okay. Interesting. So there's a lot of different layers here.
There
and
is.
It's very complicated, it sounds like.
It is, and that's why we always ask. Our task force goes out and does trainings to community members. We go out and do it to churches. We talk to the judges. We're talking to a lot of individuals to get, that just community involvement and that awareness.
Okay. There's just so much, the signs when you were talking about the tattoo on the neck. And when you said that, it just made me think about how many young people, how many young ladies I've worked with, but how many I see, and I always think that, like, why would you put a tattoo on your neck? And from what I hear you saying is in some cases they don't have a choice. They're basically branded.
They are branded,
and so that says to other people, is that branding that says, she's mine, off limits, or she's already been sold, or she is available? What?
It's
all
usually,
of the above?
it can be all of the above, but most of the time it's to say that she's mine, she's branded, and for other pimps to stay away. Yeah. And these are, like I said, these these individuals that are trafficking these girls, they're charismatic. They know exactly what to say.
Yeah.
You know, it's extremely unfortunate, and you know, it's my personal mission to make sure that, you know, the advocacy part and making sure the education part is out there for these young girls, because we can go in and we can rescue and try to help these young girls, but without the education, you know, and without the education of service providers, you know, it's going to be hard to identify, and especially they're not self-identifying.
Yeah.
So they're just out there, you know, and it becomes the norm. A lot of the girls that I interview, it's heartbreaking to me, because after they've become trafficked, it becomes their norm. So it does lead to prostitution.
Okay.
It leads to, okay, this person isn't controlling me anymore. I can go out, I'm going to take my power back, and I'm going to make money. This is how I know how to make money. So I'm going to make money until, again, they're either picked up by a trafficker, or, you know, and then that substance abuse and that mental health comes into play. And, you know, another statistic is the average girl who is trafficked, her average lifespan is 35 years old.
Wow.
It is. It's an in-depth conversation, one that needs to be had. One, you know, I'm so appreciative of you having me here, because this is a conversation. This is a conversation that parents need to be having with their children, that service providers, you know, that first responders, when you're dealing with, you know, nurses and doctors and, you know, youth providers, and then you have, you know, teachers, social workers. Like, there has to be that safe haven.
Yeah.
And it has to be expressed.
Yeah, and I also think we've had some shows talking about trauma-informed care.
Yes.
And how all of those systems and those people you just mentioned need to be more aware of these types of things, because I think there are times when we re-traumatize and re-victimize just by the way we talk to folks, or by the assumptions we make, by the things we think about, you know, with young girls having older boyfriends, that's because they're promiscuous or because they are fast, without thinking that they may not have had a choice, and they're in a situation where they have lost the power struggle, and they're in fear, and they don't have any other resources and support, so they're surviving. Again, you know, just thinking about the tattoo on the neck, you know, I'm thinking, well, why would your parents let you get a tattoo on your neck? Well, in most cases, those young people are not attached to parents who are supervising them or caring for them, or they may not be living with their parents. They may not know where their parents are. So just all of those things that, as a provider, just taking the time to learn more, so that we are helpful, and that we are a resource, and that we're not, again, re-victimizing and re-traumatizing or shutting people down, and then not allowing them to get the help and the support they need. So what services are provided by Julian Center? So if a young person comes to you, what services can they access?
So the services are provided. We provide shelter,
Okay.
the immediate needs, mental health, substance abuse, and then free counseling. And, you know, I wanted to touch on one thing that you said. You know, these girls, you know, especially as supervisors, I get it. Like, some of these young girls, they're manipulative, they lie. But that's their skill set. And I think a lot of times, you know, service providers can be put off by that. Like, well, are they really telling the truth? It doesn't matter. You know, it's our responsibility to listen to them and build that relationship with them. I have so many girls, and one in particular that always says to me, she's 21, and I'm the first positive relationship she's ever had.
Wow.
You know, from the time that she was 4 to 16, she'd been in 16 foster homes. You know, so those are things that we have to really think about. Like, every child has a story. Every child has a voice. Children are resilient.
Yes.
And going back to, you know, the services, you know, housing, meeting their immediate needs, dealing with the trauma. And it's not something that can be solved in 6 months or a year. You know, this is a lifelong process for these young girls and boys. Like I said before, I haven't worked with boys, but I know that they're out there. You know, statistically, they have to be.
Yeah.
But, you know, if someone is under the age of 17, you know, we'll contact DCS or we'll work with them. We'll figure out a way to support them. So, and, you know, changing the law, like I said, the Attorney General's office is involved, about policy and law enforcement. I mean, we're really trying to not only educate, outreach, and protect these girls, but we're really trying to make a dent in what's happening here in our city.
Tracy, can you give us the 1-800 number, that if somebody's watching this show and they have questions or concerns, what number can they call?
Yeah, they can call. It's 1-888-3737-888. Text Be Free. And that number goes right into the Julian Center.
Okay.
And then also Polaris Project, which is out of Washington, D.C., also has a 1-800 number.
Okay, so the 1-800 number, but then they can also text
Yes,
Be
text
Free.
Be Free.
BEFREE? Okay.
All one word.
Okay. And then is there a website? I think you directed me to a website where I was able to go and find information as well.
Yeah, honestly, the easiest one is to go to www.juliancenter.org.
Okay.
And then we have an iPath website, which is www.ipath.org, I believe.
Okay, so they can go to the Julian Center, which is juliancenter.org.
Yes.
And then iPath, which is Indiana Protection Against
Trafficking
Humans.
Humans, yes.
Okay. It's a lot. It's a lot.
It is a lot. That's a small.
But that website was helpful. It was helpful in defining it and talking
Yeah.
about the law. It was also helpful in getting connected to Julian Center and finding out all of the services that you provide. And then also the other organizations. It did list some of the other organizations that are involved, including Department of Child Services. And I think you really talked about this a little bit at the beginning, is that as adults in the state of Indiana, we are all mandated reporters. So
Yes.
regardless of what your job is, your title, where you work, what credentials you have. If you're an adult in the state of Indiana, you are concerned about a child, whether you're concerned about abuse or neglect, trafficking, anything, you are obligated and mandated to report that to the Department of Child Services. And when I do trainings, I always say it's not our role to become investigators, to know every single detail or to know that it happened for sure. It's just our role as concerned citizens to stand up for our children and say, I have a concern and I'd rather err on the side of caution and what's in the best interest of children, so to make that report.
Yeah, and I always tell everyone if they have a question or maybe they think something is fishy, to call me. Because I can just contact law enforcement. If they have the location and they can kind of give me a description, I can have someone check it out.
Okay,
They can go do a
immediately.
well check, yeah.
Okay. Good deal. Well, thank you, Tracy, so much
Thank
for
you.
coming. I feel like we could go on and on and on
Okay.
because, again, there's just a lot to learn, a lot to know, and it's a topic that a lot of people probably are not very familiar about and think of all of these other things, abuse and prostitution, but without realizing the economics involved and how that becomes trafficking when somebody is being sold. And unfortunately, a lot of our young people are being sold, and there's the vulnerable population, so the populations that a lot of us serve and work with in schools, in the Boys and Girls Club,
Yeah.
Big Brothers Big Sisters, DCS. Those are all kids who are already having life challenges, and then opens them up to become victims, and that there are folks out there who are looking for those kind of kids. So, but just thanks for coming. Thanks for sharing everything. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Our Kids, Our Families, Our Communities, and we look forward to seeing you for the next show. Thank you very much.